Yes, good morning. I'm going to explain to you today the graphic organizer that I decided to use. And the graphic organizer that I decided to use is the Cluster Word Web 1. The Cluster Word Web 1 is used to build on information and details, and it can be used to do multiple things. Stories, which is language and literacy, different activities that you have in the classroom, math, just different things. But I will use it in my classroom for language and literacy in doing stories and comprehension to get my students to understand the events and details that happen in the story. So the first question on our assignment was explain why you selected the graphic organizer that I chose, which was the Cluster Word Web 1. I chose this because it helps students classify ideas and communicate more effectively. The Cluster Word Web also promotes decision making, studying, and planning research and brainstorming individually as well as a whole group. Describe why is it appropriate for you to use in an early childhood classroom. The Cluster Word Web 1 is appropriate for an early childhood classroom because it gives our little learners visuals and spatial modalities and reinforces what is taught in the classroom. The Cluster Word Web Organizer helps students to internalize what they are learning. So what I mean by this is if you're reading a story and on your Cluster Word Web, your story is, let me see, Hey Little Ant. The bigger circles from the topic in the middle would be, okay, the ant, because he's a main character in the story, and the boy. The boy did not have a name in the story, so you would put the boy. And then down here you can put the boy was mean. The main details that happen in which you can build on those informations in those larger clustered circles. So for the one that has ant, Hey Little Ant, you can put the ant was little. The ant had a family. And then when you're putting these things, it can also add into other information to fill in as you're building in detail on the events that happen in the story. This also helps to reinforce events that happen in a story when you're done reading it as a class. And even before you read a story, the Cluster Word Web is good as well too. Provide a brief summary on how you would use in a cooperative group setting. I would use the graphic organizer, the Cluster Word Web, in a cooperative group setting to discuss different events that happen in a story that was read during circle time. As I mentioned before, I would use it, and I do use things like this in my 3-year-old classroom because it's good to start, introducing students to these things, because as they gradually get older and go into other, classrooms, these are things to help build on their critical thinking, their comprehension, remembering details in stories, and building on that and brainstorming ideas. So another thing too, like if you wanted to brainstorm, you could say for your class, okay, you can brainstorm an idea with them and say, we're going to make a sandwich today. You can have your class vote on what kind of sandwich they want to make. They might say, let's make a peanut butter and jelly. Or as an example, you can put peanut butter and jelly as your topic. Well, what are some things that it's going to take for us to be able to make a peanut butter and jelly? You can put in one of the larger clusters, going to the store, okay? In the smaller ones, okay, go to the store, you need to buy peanut butter, you need to get the jelly, and even probably the bread. So the little clusters are for information and details to add on to the main thing of what you're describing. The next one would be, okay, when you get home, you might want to put a plate on the table. Once you put the plate on the table, you lay your loaves of bread out. So it just helps to build in the information that you're giving. I would use the Cluster Word Web to implement during language and literacy. How I would do this is I would have students to discuss major events of details that happen in the story, and we build on each cluster based on the events that took place, as I mentioned and said before. How I would facilitate the Cluster Word Web, I would use it to facilitate the process using the Cluster Word Web would be to first start off with introducing the organizer during an icebreaker about things my students have in common. We all eat and we all need food to survive and stay healthy. So we could, like I said, do a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because we're talking about an early childhood classroom. So you want to do things that are common to them and that they all have in common. And I'm pretty sure we all eat peanut butter and jelly. Next, I will review the story. As I said before, the little ant. and describe the major events that occurred in the story, and ask my students to describe each event, and we would add to our cluster word web with the details to describe the main events that happened and took place in the story. And that's it, class. See you later.